Chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, and I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
David Stevens.
Here.
Abby Callis. Mark Goodman. Matthew Golker.
Present.
Jessica Hamilton. Edward Hunter. Tiffany Johnson.
Here.
Sarah Kirk. Rodney McNeil. Jay Middleton.
Here.
And Doug Wright.
I'm here.
And I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye and Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. Representatives from Fielding Graduate University have been approved for 15 minutes of public comment to discuss educational requirements for licensure. Because we are conducting the public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, as we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On April 23rd, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we began. There's no one currently on the conference call line, but if I hear someone enter that way, I will let you know.
Thank you, David. And the meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which would be the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Linda moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that? Was that Matt?
It was me.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. Second, we have public comment on educational requirements for licensure by Dr. David Hollingsworth and Dr. Connie Veazey, both from Fielding Graduate University. Doctors Hollingsworth and Veazey, please proceed. Thank you for coming and being with us this evening.
Okay, hello, and thank you for allowing me to make this public comment to your committee, the Kansas Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee. As you know, I'm Dr. Connie Veazey, and I'm the program director of both the Clinical Psychology PhD and Respecialization in Clinical Psychology Certificate programs at Fielding Graduate University. And I'm joined by Dr. David Hollingsworth, who is the DCT, Director of Clinical Training for both of those programs.
Hello.
I am here today to represent and advocate for our students who are seeking licensure as psychologists in the state of Kansas. In addition, I want to ensure that the committee has accurate information about our program, as viewing your meeting, which was conducted on April 9th, 2024, there are statements that indicated that some committee members were unclear about our residency requirement and status of APA accreditation. So first, I want to be clear that Fielding's clinical PhD program has been accredited by the American Psychological Association's Commission on Accreditation since 1991. Hereafter, I will refer to the Commission on Accreditation as the COA. We most recently received the full 10-year accreditation, which is the maximum amount of time COA awards programs, and we are accredited through 2033. I also want the committee to understand that we achieved and maintain this accreditation status as all other accredited programs do. That is by engaging in regular self-studies, resulting in our annual report online to the COA, and remaining compliant with the COA's standards of accreditation. The second point to address is our residency requirements. We meet the requirement of length of study for both COA and Kansas. As found in Article 1 of your Certification of Psychologists of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, Regulation KAR 102.1 through 12, Educational Requirements, Item 12, which states, before awarding the doctoral degree, the program requires each student to complete a minimum of 3 full-time academic years of graduate study or the equivalent, and to complete an internship that meets the requirements of paragraph, end quote. Fielding meets this criteria as our program is 5 years, including full years of academic study and 1 year full-time internship. Item 12 of that same regulation, Part B11, states, at least 2 of the 3 academic training years or the equivalent shall be completed at the institution from which the doctoral degree is granted, and at least 2 consecutive semesters or the equivalent number of quarters or trimesters shall be completed while the student is in residence at the same institution. The program's coursework shall also include the skills courses appropriate for the applicant's major area of emphasis, end quote. Fielding does not meet this criteria as written, as our residence is not consecutive. However, Fielding does meet the COA's residency requirement. In the APA's Standards of Accreditation for Health Service Psychology and Accreditation Operation Procedures, Standard 1 is entitled Institutional and Program Context. Part C is Program Context and Resources, and 2 of that is Length of Degree and Residency. And this states, quote, at least 1 year of which must be in full-time residence or the equivalent thereof at that same program. Programs seeking to satisfy the requirement of 1 year of full-time residence based on the equivalent thereof must demonstrate how the proposed equivalence achieves all the purposes of the residency requirement, end quote. So that's APA's standard. Fielding students in the clinical PhD program are full-time students, and COA has approved our residency requirement of 600 hours as being equivalent and also achieving the purpose of residency. The purpose of residency is defined in this same standard of the APA as allowing the program to, quote, execute professional, ethical, and potentially legal obligations to promote student development, socialization and peer interaction, faculty role modeling, and the development and assessment of student competencies. The regulation goes on to state, residency provides students with mentoring and supervision regarding their development and socialization into the profession, as well as continuous monitoring and assessment of student development through live, face-to-face, in-person interaction with faculty and students. These obligations cannot be met in programs that are substantially or completely online, end quote. The clinical PhD program at Fielding is a distributed model comprised of both online and in-person learning. We are the only clinical psychology PhD program that uses a distributed model that is accredited by COA. In addition, our program is not substantially or completely online. As mentioned, the clinical program at Fielding requires 600 hours of live, face-to-face, in-person interaction with faculty and students prior to obtaining the degree. 600 hours is equivalent to 2 years of in-person residence at other institutions. And 300 of these hours must be completed in the first 2 years of our program. Residency activities include a 44-hour new student orientation completed upon students' entry into the program. There are also intensive week-long residential sessions where students attend in-person classes and trainings. There are weekend-long professional development seminars which students attend throughout their time in the program with their dedicated program faculty advisor. And there are other relevant in-person meetings with faculty. So again, thank you for allowing us to make this public comment and advocating for our students who are excellently trained in clinical psychology through a well-tested and accredited distributed model of training. Other states do allow our students to be licensed based on our having achieved full accreditation from COA. And we would ask that Kansas also consider this for our students to be able to serve the citizens of your state. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Dr. Veazey. Dr. Hollingsworth, do you have anything to add?
I do not, but thank you again for letting us meet with you all today.
Well, thank you both very much. Does anyone have any questions for Doctors Hollingworth and Doctors Hollingworth and Veazey as they are here?
I do. Can you hear me okay? This is Mark Goodman. Oh, can you
Yes,
can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear. I
Oh,
can
good.
hear.
Okay. I apologize. I'm computer literate and I got on late, a few minutes late. I missed did you talk about, was it 1,800 hours of training over a year, the equivalent? I didn't know if that was part of the program too, that they would have 2 years of supervisory experience.
We students have to complete 1,520 practicum hours. That is
Okay.
separate from residency. It is in person largely. We're supervisors or licensed PhD psychologists, but not faculty of the program. So those two things for APA are separate. Residency has to be by our core faculty, but we do have 1,520 hours of practicum. That's in addition,
Okay.
separate.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Mark, for your question. Tiffany?
I was wondering, when do you have students in Kansas that are graduating anytime soon or they're going to be licensed?
We have one student who reached out to us about this, and it is my understanding I've been program director since 21, and I've been at Fielding since 2015, that historically our students have not been allowed to be licensed in Kansas. Before my time, I think people have applied, but since I've been here, we now have one, right, David?
One for sure.
Okay. I was just trying to get a sense of the timeline of, yeah.
So to clarify, you've been fully accredited by APA since 1991. Is that
Yes,
I
that is
thought I heard
correct.
that correct?
That's
I wanted to
correct.
check. And what do you think are the strengths of the distributed model versus an in-person model?
Well, the strengths
regular
are allowing us to educate students in rural areas who would not otherwise have access to a doctoral education. Students with other life demands who that kind of flexibility is needed. That's the strength of it. The main strength, there's a lot of others.
Thank you.
David, would you have something to add to that?
Yeah, excuse me, I think to add on to that, I think that with the use of telehealth, and I think because of COVID and things were happening before COVID, I found myself when I practiced, it was a hard transition going from fully in-person to online telehealth. And I think that Fielding students already having that skill set, doing a lot of work over telehealth platforms or through the video conferencing system, is also a strength of the program as well. And just know that the use of telehealth is going to continue to increase in the future.
Does anyone else have any questions for Doctors Veazey and Hollingsworth? None seen. Thank you both very much for coming this evening. We really appreciate the presentation, and please do reach out to us if you would like to present again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move along to our next agenda item, and during their presentation, Ned Hunter has arrived and Mark Goodman has arrived. So I'll note the presence of those two members. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. That's April 9th, 2024. You all should have received those minutes in the email that came, I think, on Friday. Are there any changes that need to be made to the minutes? None seen. I'll take a motion to approve last meeting's minutes.
I approve it.
All right, I've got a motion from Mark. Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
And Jay seconds. All those in favor, please do say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item, and that's the executive director's report. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Richard. Let's start with some BSRB operations update. I did want to let individuals know that the BSRB has a new website since the last time your advisory committee met. We have launched a new website under the Granicus platform. A number of state agencies have moved to new websites recently, and some of the reasons for the change, this should allow individuals who are accessing our website with mobile devices to have a little bit better ease of access in terms of accessing certain documents and doing certain features on the website. And also it should be a way to kind of streamline some of the main things that we offer to the public and to applicants in terms of ways to apply for licensure. And so that was sort of something we worked on behind the scenes for several months now, and happy to say that that is officially launched, and that we've seen just some minor issues, but we've worked through most of those. And so if you do get a chance to take a look at it, let us know what you think. If you see any issues, please let us know so we can make sure that everything is a smooth transition to the new website. Also wanted to let individuals know that since the last time you met, we did reach an agreement with CE Broker. That is a company that the board received a presentation from a little while back. It is a company that partners with licensing agencies like the BSRB in Kansas and also other states. And now that we have reached an agreement with CE Broker, basically over the next few months, they will start to roll out some services to our licensees. And the way that that works, in kind of a high-level summary, they offer a free service to partner with us as a licensing agency, and then they offer free services to our licensees that need to earn continuing education hours for their license renewal. And so when you are renewing your license, 10% of our licensees are selected for audit, and then those individuals would have to demonstrate completion of the continuing education requirement. And right now, that would mean sending a lot of information into our office staff so that we could review that and verify that people pass the audit. Under this new model with CE Broker, individual licensees would have a choice. They could have the option to sign up for one of these free CE Broker accounts, and then they could upload their documentation into CE Broker so that they're selected for audit. Instead of them having to send all the documentation to us, our staff could log into the portal, verify that they've completed the necessary hours and the necessary categories, and then be approved for audit a lot quicker. So it's a nice service for our licensees. The Board of Nursing and Board of Healing Arts have recently also come under the CE Broker services. And so what we have been informed about is they're going to start with professional counseling first, and then I think social work will be the profession they're going to move to second. So we will send out announcements as we get to each of the professions to let individuals know how the process works, but wanted to let you know that we were able to complete an agreement with them, and we'll be moving forward on that over the next few months as well. Additionally, I was contacted by representatives from the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, and they wanted to partner with other state agencies to work on workforce solutions, and they wanted to apply for something called a Behavioral Health Workforce Policy Academy, which, if it is granted, they would receive support at the federal level to collect research and get assistance in terms of looking at what other states are doing to kind of brainstorm some solutions to address workforce, specifically in the mental health field. So the Department for Aging Disability Services, the BSRB, also the Board of Regents did decide to come together and apply for that academy, and we were awarded that academy. So we have started to meet with representatives from the federal government. They're going to be providing us some resources, and we're going to have an in-person meeting all together, and other state agencies in different states that are similarly working together on the same types of issues. We'll also be meeting in Nashville in September. So looking forward to having more good partnerships with other state agencies working on addressing some of the issues related to workforce. Not all these may have a direct connection to the BSRB. For example, some of this may look at tuition reimbursement. For the BSRB, we don't really have a lot of funding for that purpose, but we can help out in terms of being part of these groups, part of these conversations, and looking at addressing these issues in a lot of different ways. So on behalf of the BSRB, I'll be participating in these Workforce Academy meetings, and I'll report back to you the work of that group. Moving to some legislative updates, there were 2 bills that passed this legislative session I want to make you aware of. First, there was a social work multi-state compact that was passed, House Bill 2484. That bill will go into effect as of July 1st. We were the 7th state to pass the social work compact, which is the number that has to pass the compact for the Rules Committee to start to meet. So this fall, representatives from different states will determine their commissioners, and then those commissioners will begin to have meetings to work out the operating rules of the compact. Based on the other mental health compacts that have been passed over the last few years, I would estimate that no earlier than maybe next fall is when the compact may begin to be operational, but there's some other things to work out. They need to figure out a good way to keep track of everyone practicing under a multi-state compact. So there may be some sort of a database for that purpose, and then also lining up the requirements of the different states, and so and then other operational rules. So that is going to be worked on here this fall and probably next spring. Additionally, there was a separate bill that passed, House Bill 2745, and that is a bill that exempts military spouses of active military service members from occupational licensing fees. So that is not unique to the BSRB. It is for other licensing agencies in the state of Kansas as well. But we've had some conversation this spring about BSRB revenue and expenditures, and this is one of those bills that it will decrease revenue for licensing agencies. So what this does refer to is when someone is a military spouse of an active duty service member, they will not have to pay things like application fees, original license fees, license renewal fees. It even goes as far as if there's a background check requirement that is not passed on to the licensing board, but it would essentially be waived instead of being paid to something like KBI. So just want to make you aware of that. It shouldn't have a huge effect on BSRB revenue, but it will have some effect in terms of reducing our revenue. So, but it is a nice benefit to those military spouse service members, spouses of military service members. It will become effective as of July 1st. So we're working with our licensing host to make sure we have that in place so that individuals can start benefiting from that as of July 1st. Moving to some other updates, I'll go ahead and move now to some highlights from the last board meeting. The board met recently on May 13th, and happy to report that one of the items that occurred at that meeting, there were several different advisory committee members that were reappointed to serve on the advisory committees. Based on your advisory committee and the terms of when individuals came up, no one was up for reappointment, but a lot of individuals will be up at the end of a 2-year term next time. So next year, there will be some reappointments to the advisory committee. However, there is also the board's appointee to an entity called the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And the board had appointed Jason Hess to serve as the appointee to that entity. The board went ahead and determined to reappoint Jason Hess to serve in that group for about the next 2 years. And so they did make that reappointment. Additionally, one of the other major takeaways from the board meeting, currently right now, the BSRB receives licensing services through system automation and My License Office hosted by the Board of Healing Arts. But last year there was a bill that passed the legislature that part of it involved setting up a new licensing system that would become an enterprise licensing system for any state agency wishing to move to that model. And recently it was when the legislature ended their session, they did pass legislation that would cover the cost of ongoing operational charges to state agencies for moving under that banner. And the implementation costs, we have received verification that those implementation costs would be covered by federal ARPA money under some of the COVID-19 money available to states. So currently right now we pay about $72,000 per year for our licensing system, and being able to eliminate that cost and move to this new system under Acela was a very notable item. There's also some other benefits moving under this new system, which would include being able to set up online applications for individuals applying for licensure. Currently right now, we offer online renewals, but moving to this new system would allow us to do online applications for original licensure. There's some other integrated processes that would be really helpful for our staff. Currently right now, we have different processes that are not connected to each other, so our staff needs to spend time connecting a lot of those resources. But under this new system, it would pull those items together, so it would save us staff time as well. So the board did vote to move to the new system. I have informed the Office of Information Technology Services that the board has approved that move to Acela. Based on other agencies that are already in the order to be moved to Acela, probably that won't occur fully for about the next 2 years. But during that time frame, we will be providing our forms and working with their representatives to get that moved over. So it will be a savings eventually once we are able to move away from our existing provider, but that may not be for a couple of years. So I just wanted to put it on your radar, let you know about that. It'll probably be another transition that is mostly behind the scenes, but it will be a benefit for applicants and then also for our licensees to reduce costs as well. Aside from that, we did have a discussion about jurisprudence examinations and alternative solutions to that issue. And there is an item on the agenda for this meeting to discuss with your advisory committee as well. So with that, I think I will go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Any questions? Well, seeing none, I would just like to say that I'm very happy about a couple of things. One, that the social work compact passed. I know that that took a lot of work, and I appreciate the work that you spent on getting the social work compact passed, Dave. And also, I'm really happy about about CE Broker getting implemented. I think that is going to be a real boon for psychologists as well as the other behavioral health professionals or up under the umbrella of the BSRB. So I'm really glad to see that occurring. With that being said, let's move on to updates from the ASPPB mid-year meeting.
Okay. Well, I was able to attend the mid-year meeting from the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, and I attended that meeting with board member David Stevens. So I just wanted to thank David for attending that meeting. And I learned quite a bit of information and continued to build relationships with representatives from other states there, and really appreciate him attending and receiving that information as well, and also making connections. And so I just wanted to highlight a few things that I took away from that meeting. David, if you have any other comments, feel free to add those items as well. One of the major benefits in attending those meetings is occasionally they have a day that has the administrators for licensing boards that have the same role that I do in different states. We come together and we share information about new processes that we're working on, and items that we maybe are struggling with that we can kind of learn from each other and then bring back ideas to our states to help implement new things. Some of the things that I was hearing about from other states, there were similar legislation in terms of items with military members and military fees. Some of the different states were looking at reducing regulations. And you might recall that one of our major focuses in the last few years has been reviewing our regulations to make sure that the regulations we do have are not outdated and that they do continue to serve a purpose. So I think there's been some other states that have been kind of addressing those in different ways. There was also an approach that some of the states are making in terms of individuals who are struggling to pass tests, in terms of licensing tests. And so there was some interesting ideas being put forward from Minnesota. I think they have looked at putting together sort of a package of resources from individuals. And it's not to everyone who is not able to pass the test, but they kind of set up a scholarship type of a system where individuals that were not able to pass the test can apply for consideration, and then they get additional support if they're selected as one of the individuals based on some criteria. So that was kind of an interesting thing that they are just starting to launch, and I'll be able to kind of track that a little bit and provide more information on that. But trying to look at helping more individuals pass things like the licensing examination. There was also some information from individuals. They were talking a little bit about sort of the EPPP in general. We've talked a little bit about that. ASPPB is the entity that has created the EPPP as licensing examination. And a couple of years ago, there was a decision that was made by the board of ASPPB that as of July 1st, 2026, there would be a requirement that the EPPP would be considered one test, and any states wishing to continue to use the EPPP would need to include both the requirement of passing part 1 and part 2, and it would at that point be seen as one test with 2 different parts. And so we've talked about that a little bit over the last couple of years. That is coming up as of January 1st of 2026. There have been some meetings in Texas recently. They've been pushing back on that. And individuals in Texas have been seeking to see if there's a way that they can possibly extend that date into the future. As of right now, I don't think that is being something that is being considered. But Texas is also having discussions about, is there a way to create their own licensing examination? And so I will continue to kind of track those conversations as well in terms of what is going on in Texas. I have not heard the same conversations from other states right now. It appears to be mostly coming from Texas, but I will let you know what else I hear on that front. In terms of some other takeaways from the conference, there are some task force that ASPPB has put together to help states. One is dealing with educational equivalency processes. In Kansas right now, if individuals attend a program that's accredited by APA, we're able to move those individuals through the process in most cases. But if they do not attend an APA accredited program, there are still the alternate requirements in the regulations. However, we've talked a little bit about states potentially moving away from APA accreditation, the concept of PC-SAS accreditation, but then potentially looking at the standards being based on equivalencies, but being able to demonstrate those items versus the traditional model, which was based on completion of coursework. And so how do states have a good way to gauge completion of the requirement if we're moving away from a coursework type requirement? There was also some discussion about technology and states trying to look at telehealth, and especially telehealth as it relates to disciplinary complaints. That is one of the topics that is not unique to psychology, but we've seen that in other states as well. Some of the states are really struggling with that in terms of seeing an increase in complaints based on issues related to confidentiality issues, issues related to just general practice shortcomings in terms of a lack of professionalism in terms of how people are providing services by telehealth. So they're looking at maybe considering some standards in some of those states that are having issues with telehealth. So, but it was a good conference. The ASPPB will have an annual meeting later on this year, and they'll continue to be looking at some of these topics as well. So, David, did you have any other takeaways you wanted to share with the advisory committee from the sessions that you were observing?
No, the thing that was most valuable for me was they had new board member training kind of course, several hours devoted to that, where myself and other relatively new board members were able to kind of get a cross-sectional view of what it looks like, not just from our board, but other boards, and it was a really valuable experience. So I appreciated the opportunity.
Yeah, well, with that, I'll go ahead and kind of wrap up that item. See if there's any questions from anyone concerning the ASPPB mid-year meeting.
I have a question, kind of going back nearer to the beginning of your report out. In terms of states addressing the EPPP and passing it, was there an explicit discussion around the current pass rate of the EPPP?
I don't recall a conversation on the current pass rate of the EPPP. Generally, they provide some updates in terms of overall pass rate, but I don't recall any specifics from that conversation. Usually, they just give general updates on that. So.
And I think that's kind of what I'm asking, like the general pass rate for the EPPP, and I guess that would be over a certain number of years average that they would give a general pass rate.
Yeah, and I can go ahead and pull that and see if there's information available on the EPPP pass rate. Sometimes that information may also be broken down on first-time test takers as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll look to see if I can get some of that, at least for the most recent years, and bring that back.
Sure, thank you.
I know in the past, I'm going back 50 years, it's a long time, each state would have different pass rates. Some might be like 70%, even 75%, 65%, that type of thing. I can remember that. And now I guess we're trying to make it more uniform. Am I correct? Throughout the whole country with the new model that we're doing, for make it the same in each state. I'm making that assumption that's changed quite a bit, and I'm all for that. Is the actual score is it because 70% right now or 75%? I'm just curious. Do we have any ideas at all from any of the other people on the advisory committee that might know that?
The pass rate required is 500, which would have been equivalent to 70%.
Okay, I appreciate that. I didn't know it's been so long.
Yeah,
so
I understand.
Thank you.
I don't remember where I heard this, so correct me if I'm it seemed like it was at one of our meetings, but wasn't there information about one of the reasons they're thinking about going to the different model that has a skills-based competency versus over reliance on the exam, because there were cultural and ethnic variability within the pass rate?
So from what I have heard, it sounds like the history is that a lot of states had an oral examination, at least for some of the professions. But the issue with the oral exam was that there was a lot of subjectivity. There was some attacks as far as defensibility of an oral exam, and possible bias. And so there was, and it sounds like from what I have heard, the initial conversation in terms of creating an EPPP2, a skills-based test, was sort of an effort to have sort of a standardized exam that would gauge skills, and then the EPPP, what was now referred to as EPPP Part 1 would be more of a knowledge type test, and then the EPPP Part 2 would be more of a skills-based test. And it was, I think, from what I've heard, it was intended to kind of replace what states had developed on their own and make something a bit more uniform between states, something more defensible than an oral exam. So that's what I recall. And originally, from the history that I have heard, it appears that ASPPB started working on this several years back, and then there was a proposal to implement it. It was met with opposition, and so ASPPB said, we're going to pull this back. We're going to continue to reevaluate things for the next few years, and then reconsider whether this should be something that should be a requirement or not. And so they said I don't forget if it was 4 years or 5 years, but that was kind of the time frame. And then they brought it back, and the board made a decision. The board of ASPPB made a decision to make that integrated into the EPPP. So that was not put before the membership. We didn't get an opportunity to vote whether it should be a requirement in Kansas or not. It was more of, if states want to continue to use it after January 1st of 2026, if you want to use the EPPP, you will have to require both Part 1 and Part 2. Now, there are still some things to be worked through. We have master's level psychology in Kansas. It's still not entirely clear how that would work for individuals at the master's level. Currently, right now, they take the EPPP in Kansas and have to get a score of 400 based on what we would require. There is also the issue of, they have clarified and said, there's no intention to make people go back and take this if they've already passed the EPPP, years ago or currently. So it's not meant to make people go back and now pass a new test who've already been licensed for some time. But there were some states that were early adopters who voluntarily chose to make it a requirement. So there are a few states that already do require both passage of the EPPP and EPPP Part 2. But as of January 1st of 2026, it'll just be a requirement in the remaining states. And so, but by using it as Part 1 and Part 2 of the same test, that kind of clears some of the legal questions about whether the state laws still require it as one test or not. That is my understanding.
Any other questions or anything else that anybody might want to add on this matter, ASPPB and its mid-year meeting? All right, none seen. We'll move on to our SIPAC update.
Okay, and I did include some information. SIPAC did put out a yearly report for 2023, so I included it in your materials. I don't have a lot of updates in terms of new information on SIPAC, but basically the number of individuals in Kansas in terms of who has a SIPAC authorization to practice telehealth, and then also individuals who have obtained the ability to practice a number of days of in-state practice per year have kind of leveled off. And so right now those totals are right at about 100, including both categories. But the document I did provide to you does kind of share a little bit of the history. It shares a nice map of all the different states and some of the recent states that have passed legislation to become part of SIPAC. So I just wanted to provide that to you, but SIPAC will be holding an annual meeting later on this year. It will be an in-person meeting, so I'll be attending that as the commissioner for Kansas, and I'll let you know if there's any other big items coming up from that SIPAC meeting.
All right. Any questions for Dave regarding the meeting that's pending later on in the year, or the update that he has supplied us with? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next agenda item, and that's old business. And the only item under old business that we have is our continued discussion of possible changes to the educational requirements for graduate programs. And we had a very productive discussion in our last meeting, which led to the presentation that we had earlier today about educational requirements for graduate programs and the degree to which we might want to limit certain changes or expand certain changes. Dave, I can have you take over and pull those and go full screen.
Sure. So I will share my screen here and pull up a copy of KAR 102-1-12, which is the regulation that has the educational requirements for licensure for the psychology profession. Is that text large enough, or you'd like me to make it a little bigger? That's good. Okay. And so, yes, we've talked a little bit about when individuals apply for licensure. What we look at is we look at this regulation and the statutes to see if someone has met the requirements for licensure, and specifically as it relates to the educational requirement. This regulation does reference if someone applies from an APA accredited program, and then it also has some program level requirements for individuals who have applied from those programs, whether they came from an APA accredited program or a non-APA accredited program. So one of the items that we have talked about before, and I wanted to make sure that this was highlighted for the committee, is for some of the other professions, their educational requirements had stated previously that if individuals applied for licensure, if they came from an accredited program, there would still be a requirement that they met sort of an in-residence requirement in addition to coming from the accredited program. One of the other professions that has made a change in that recently is the marriage and family therapy profession. They had made a change in their regulations recently. So basically the new change for them is that if someone came from an accredited program, they would no longer need to meet the in-residence requirement in the regulation. But if someone came from a program that was not accredited, they would need to meet that in-residence requirement. In your regulation, it does state that if someone came from an APA accredited school, they would still need to meet the in-residence requirement. So that is an item I wanted to highlight for you and make sure that you were aware is included here. And then also, as you can see on the front page, there's a definition of the term in residence. And it does say in residence when used to describe a student, means that the student is present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in physical proximity and face-to-face contact. So that is the current definition of in residence for the psychology profession. It does make specific reference to the student being present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of completing coursework. And it does reference the student and one or more core faculty members are in physical proximity and face-to-face contact. So wanted to kind of frame some of that understanding as you go through and you look at the requirements, both the program level requirements and also any kind of coursework level requirements or other requirements that someone would need to meet. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Leslie Allen, and maybe she can kind of share any thoughts that she thinks might be helpful for the advisory committee based on maybe the public comment that you heard earlier, or maybe some of the discussion that we've had at previous meetings too.
So I was just going to add for the in residence for psychology, that includes the assessment and therapy courses. Those are the specific, I'm trying to look at the, those are the specific courses that need to be taken in residence. So it's not just any courses.
And Leslie, can you clarify what number those are under?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. 24 hours in paragraph little b 13C.
Looks like that's on page 5.
Yeah.
So the methods of diagnosing and defining problems through psychological assessments and measurements, and the strategies and techniques of the therapy intervention and remediation.
Mm-hmm. And then 9 it's C 1 and 2. So 9 semester credit hours in assessment or the equivalent in quarter hours, and 15 semester credit hours or the equivalent in techniques of therapeutic interventions and effective therapeutic intervention, consultation, and supervision.
Where does it stipulate that it must be done face to face?
That's in the definition of in residence at the top under A.
Yes, and we're in 1 and 2. Does it say?
Oh, it says it in C that,
Oh, it says in, oh,
Explicit.
there it is. I
Yeah.
missed it. Thank you.
no, that's fine. It's a lot, it's a little wordy.
I really like the idea of I guess I'm from the old fashioned, the fact that more face to face and in-house things, I think is so important in residence. So I'm glad to see that. And of course, in the old days, it was all in residence. So, but the more of that, the better, in my opinion, make you a better clinician in what you do.
I guess maybe I have kind of a different opinion. I think having these courseworks have to be in residence. I think it's becoming really difficult to define exactly what that means. Currently in Kansas, at our state institutions, even students who are on campus complete only about 40% of their coursework actually in a classroom. So they're on campus and they're taking coursework by Zoom or, televideo. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to tour the new DO school for med students in Wichita. Amazing facility. And I was looking at this huge 300-person conference hall, and there were 3 people in it. And I'm like, where are all the med students? Where are all the residents? And they're like, nobody actually attends in person anymore.
Mhm.
Everybody is attending remotely. They go home, they can listen to a lecture at double time. My brain's old. I can't listen to a lecture at regular time, let alone sped up. But I'm worried that if we leave things as are, we're setting ourselves up where even students who are on a regular traditional campus may not meet the letter of this law, because I think it's not how students today are getting their education. So I think we could be behind times. Granted, when I went to school, that wasn't an option. It was everybody was in person in a regular classroom. But really, by the letter of the law, I think even students who are on campus taking classes that way wouldn't qualify. So I would prefer we defer just to a program being accredited. That's not my two. That's my.
Doug, this is Mark. Oh, I'm sorry if I cut someone off.
That's okay.
Yeah. I was going to say that, Doug, I agree with you. I mean, the more in service of the more you can be at the institution in face-to-face learning, supervision, watching your professor watching you do therapy, which is what I went through at BYU, the better off you're going to be. So I agree with you actually. In that respect, it's just I don't know what to say. It's just things have just changed so much over the years, and I don't think I worry about the quality of a clinical psychologist or other professional being compromised by more of the online learning and stuff like that personally, but that's a whole nother argument or discussion.
Also, something I would just add, I know that it's not, you don't want to water it down too much, but APA is the standard nationally. And most students starting out wouldn't know to go to look at our requirements to see that an APA program wouldn't meet our requirements. And all someone has to do to come in through reciprocity now is get licensed in another state for a year. And then they can come in no matter where their education was, APA or not. So I think we may, want to, this is the minimum these are supposed to be the minimum standards, not the gold standard. So that's just.
I think I really like your points, Leslie. I think that's a good reminder. This is a minimum standard. And I hadn't really thought about what you said until you just said it, which is clear back when I was in graduate school, I worried a whole lot about attending a APA accredited program and getting an APA accredited internship site. I never once looked at Kansas regulations.
Right.
I just assumed that I'm doing the gold standard by being in an APA accredited program and internship. And so that's why I would be in favor of us recommending that this changes to just be from an accredited program and let the accreditation bodies decide what's the standard, because I think that's what students are going to look at.
And so if we made that change, that it was from an accredited program, then the community members that presented earlier, then their program would qualify. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
One other thing that comes to mind just as we're talking about this is that we're currently on a digital call. And if we think that this is okay, and we think that telehealth is okay, then I don't know that we can tell trainees that they have to do it differently.
So there's a couple pieces of this conversation. And I just kind of want to separate out the issues here. So the first issue is something the advisory committee could consider. If someone came from one of the national accredited programs, the APA accredited programs, one option could be that if they came from an APA accredited program, they would not have to also meet the in-residence requirement. That would be sufficient if someone came from an APA accredited program. But if individuals did not receive their education from an APA accredited program, then they could still be asked to meet the in-residence requirement, which is what you have. We have some regulations that are about to go into effect, but that would be the new standard for marriage and family therapy, social work, addiction counseling, and professional counseling. So their standard is if you're from a nationally accredited program, you don't have to also meet the in-residence requirement. But if you didn't receive your education from a nationally accredited program, then at least some of your coursework would need to meet that in-residence requirement. So that is one of the issues. A second issue could be to look at the definition of in-residence to see whether all of the terms in that definition should still be retained in the definition of in-residence. So I just wanted to kind of separate out the issues for y'all.
And the other question then, David, because one of the things, and I was trying to find it in here, if I understood what they were saying correctly, it was not so much that they didn't meet the time requirement of the in residency, it's just that it wasn't sequential. whereas ours requires it to be sequential? Is that what they said?
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Leslie.
I believe that they did say that, but that is a different part of the regulation. That's in the program requirements.
Mm.
And that's more about what a college defines as in residence, not our definition of in residence. That is, hold on, I'm looking. I might be in the wrong part. I passed it, sorry.
That's okay. When is it?
Training for practice is sequential, cumulative, graded in complexity, and designed to prepare the students for further organized training. And
Leslie, I think that was in 12
well,
on page 4.
Was it 12 or 13? I can't remember, but
I think it was
I
12.
find it.
Yeah, because I think the language was at least
yes,
2
12.
pre-academic training years or the equivalent shall be completed at the institution from which the doctoral degree is granted, and at least
Yeah, there it is, 2 consecutive semesters.
or the equivalent number of quarters or trimesters shall be completed while the student is in residence at the same institution.
Which when you look at demographics, if you had somebody, a non-traditional student going back to school, they might be able to be gone for 1 semester, but not 2 sequential semesters as well. That's, and somebody convinced me that being there for 2 sequential semesters holds value over 2 non-sequential semesters.
I don't know, that's exactly what I'm doing, but it's always been confusing to me, and I've asked people to explain it to me before, and got interesting responses as to why an institution, particularly specifically Fielding, actually is able to do what they do. I missed the first 10 minutes. I apologize. So this may have been addressed there, but the APA requirement is actually, as I understand it, a year in residence, whatever that means. Was that explained or discussed in her presentation?
She talked about, and somebody else can jump in, but what she talked about is she was COA accredited, and they've got accreditation for 10 years, and they don't have that sequential. They have that requirement that it's 2 semesters or the equivalent, however many equivalent hours, but it's not sequential. It's not consecutive.
I'm not certain. I'll have to go look at what APA COA says.
Yeah,
I thought it was a year. I can't recall.
I think they referenced something or equivalent, and
Yeah.
their 600 hours is more than equivalent, and so they have been APA accredited since 91.
Yep.
I do have a question, and this is maybe controversial, a little bit unrelated, but under 13 AI, I think it's 13AI, biological aspects of behavior, including clinical neuropsychology and the biological foundations of psychopathology. There are 6 states now that allow clinical psychologists, PhDs, to prescribe medication. I happen to be one of the ones that went through the program. I know there are very few in Kansas that went through the training to prescribe medication. I believe that we should get more training, that the PhD psychologist should receive more training in psychopharmacology, being familiar with the different medications. And I know I'm getting in an area that people are going to disagree with me, but I feel very strongly about that, going through 5 years of training myself and passing board examinations in psychopharmacology. I don't know how you guys feel, but that maybe it's unrelated, but I want to bring that up.
I appreciate the comment, and I am going to table that for now because that could get us into a whole other different discussion. That is a very, but I will entertain that as a topic that we can put on a future agenda, as well as I would encourage you, Mark, to reach out to the Kansas Psychological Association, our trade association, and have a discussion with them. And I'm putting things on people's plates that are on this call. I recognize that too, but I'm going to table that because that get us into a whole different conversation. I do want to speak to one quick thing about the matter of it being consecutive and being in residence. I think that the way in which they are, and this is to Ned's question, the way that they are able to they're able to meet this is when our guest discussed that they have these week-long seminars as well as the weekend seminars at various places across the country, and that counts as the residency pieces for the program, if I remember correctly. I think that's how Fielding gets that done.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at the COA site, and yeah, it says 1 year full-time residency, which I guess, I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room in that. I guess you could have, 1 day every week over 3 years. I mean, I don't know how you decide these things.
I think that it's kind of pieced together through, and they go, and I've heard about this. They go to various hotel venues across the country, and people are required to come in and see their advisors at the various venues, and that's, I think, how it's completed.
I've never looked, or it has been many years since anyone's reviewed Fielding's information, but I don't even know if they're in residence at the hotels or wherever they gather are specifically the courses we require to be in residence. So that hasn't been reviewed. I know in non-APA programs, the courses that were done in a similar fashion were not the courses that in assessment and treatment. So
I think it might be helpful as part of this conversation to kind of revisit the definition of in resident. It's got a few pieces, and I just kind of wanted to highlight a few of those pieces. So we talked about the definition of in residence at the beginning. When used to describe a student, means the student is present at the physical location. So there is an in-person presence. It's also been held when we have reviewed applicants that it's not just about being physically there to receive the learning, it's physically there at the institution. And so what we have consistently done is looked to see, was there the in-person presence at the school? And so if there was something that was done at, let's say, hotels or other places that really wouldn't meet the letter of the law based on the definition, because it does talk about being physically present at the institution. It is also in the definition for the purpose of completing coursework through which the student and one or more core faculty members. There's also an element that would involve being in front of core faculty members. Again, physical proximity and face-to-face contact. So when we're talking about in resident, some of the other professions have changed their definition so that in resident can mean either physically present or face-to-face by synchronous video conferencing. But for master's level psychology and also for PhD level psychology, the in residence has continued to include the requirement of being physically present at the institution. So wanted to make sure to highlight those terms, so you know specifically what we're talking about when we're talking about the in residence definition.
Yeah, that's interesting because it seems that that definition would be inconsistent to how we think of in-person or face-to-face for therapy, at least how the payers, and I know we're not a board that talks about Medicaid, Medicare, and all of them, but they consider telehealth face-to-face, even though they're not in one location. So it would seem there might be an argument to say we should be consistent with how we look at face-to-face for our training purposes.
I'm going to agree with you as well, because their distinction is with the face-to-face that it's synchronous versus asynchronous, right? So you can't do store and forward. It's got to be real time.
Yeah, I would like to see us maybe redefine it as synchronous, because I think somebody, maybe it was Matt, somebody earlier said it's good enough for us to meet here, and we count that for our purposes. Should we not do that for students?
Would you like me to pull up one of the definitions so you can kind of see an alternate definition for the in residence? To kind of see how that's laid out.
Yes, I'd like to at least.
All right, let me kind of share that. That way we can kind of put them. I don't know if I can do a side by side, but I can go back and forth between the two. It may be helpful to see that.
While you're pulling that up, another question would be, in like, I'm at K-Med Center. So we work with KU Lawrence campus, and we've got students that come over to the Med Center. But hypothetically, what if I was in the institution that had the coursework that met the requirements, but I was affiliated with or I had an agreement with an unaffiliated, like a community mental health center, to complete the residency requirements. That technically wouldn't be the, like when you're looking at the in residence, it says the physical institution or the school. So.
Yeah, this is the proposed change, and we are about a week away from this becoming permanent for the professional counseling profession. But their change to the definition of in residence and their regulation was they struck the requirement that the person be present at the physical location of the institution, so that it says in residence when describing a student means the student is completing coursework. during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in face-to-face contact, either in person or by synchronous video conferencing. So that is the consistent definition between professional counseling, marriage and family therapy, addiction counseling, and social work. So there is still the requirement in terms of the core faculty. There is still the face-to-face and the clarification that at least for those professions, it could either be in person or by synchronous video conferencing. And actually the version that was approved by the board included some additional language that said synchronous, real-time video conferencing to clarify that was further clarifying what we mean when we say synchronous in terms of that context.
I certainly like the idea of there being consistency when possible amongst professions. So for me personally, I would be in favor of us adopting the idea that if you're from an accredited program, we accept that. If you're not from an accredited program, we use our current outline, but then we make this change to define in residence in this way. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I also think the advantage of adopting, if you're part of a accredited program you're in, is then that buys us a little bit of time to kind of work through some of these issues in the meantime, and still allows people to practice here. Because I think even if we do allow accredited programs, automatically adding a new section at top, we'll still have to review and update the rest of the regulations if they don't meet accreditation.
Yeah, there's based on new APA requirements and looking at PC-SAS, I think there's going to be a lot of changes needed in non-accredited programs.
Hey, David, I know you've spoken about this before too, but when somebody comes through from or maybe it's Leslie, when somebody comes through from a non-accredited program, it feels like it's, you're having to basically, accredit the program, which is I can only imagine what a nightmare that would be. Is that done in a lot of other states? Do they actually do what we do in Kansas, have this whole set of accreditation, practically guidelines for that the state has to do that? I don't know.
So one of our challenges as a composite board, we oversee 7 professions. You are absolutely 100% right that it is an incredible challenge to ask the licensing board do what a national accrediting body would be, having experts do. But I think there are some states, at least for some of the professions we regulate, that just draw a line and say, if you want to practice in this state, you come from a nationally accredited program. Otherwise, you're not going to practice here. It's not true for all of them, but some states have drawn a line, and from a licensing perspective, that would make things very efficient and people would get clear understanding. When I say sometimes that I feel like Kansas's licensing system is flexible, it's because our regulations say you can either come from an accredited program or we will give you an alternate set of requirements to try to establish substantial equivalency. And it's done in an effort, I think, to help applicants, but it sometimes really makes things difficult. And we don't see this as often in the psychology applicants, but we do see this with some regularity in, let's say, professional counseling from individuals who come from schools that are not accredited. And there are some states that say, if you attended a non-accredited school, it is on you to get documentation showing that it is substantially equivalent. And some of those states actually say the cost of that is passed on to the applicant. In Kansas, we hire experts or we send them to companies to do those types of reviews, and we absorb the cost ourselves to the benefit of the applicants. But it does make it very, very complicated. And so it is tricky, and it further complicates it with the change the APA has made in recent years to move away from the coursework type requirements to more of a competency-based type of a system. And I think that's why one of the task forces is looking at trying to establish uniform standards to help out states in doing those types of reviews. But thankfully for psychology, we don't see it very often. But it is important that we review what we have and have had in place for a number of years to make sure whatever we do have in place, we're able to work with. And Leslie, did you have any comments? Because you actually do a lot of these reviews and try to you see what individuals are submitting when they apply for licensure, or sometimes when they're deficient in one area or another.
Yeah, well, thankfully we don't get a lot of non-APA accredited programs, so that's a plus. You know, I haven't honestly looked at other states and what they're allowing in lieu of an APA accredited program. So I don't know how many allow non-APA, but I know there are some. But I can't say how many.
Thank you. I kind of have to chuckle with all due respect to the counselors that document you have up there. It sort of begs the question. It's like the common sense meaning of in residence is kind of almost destroyed by the meaning that, and I keep thinking about what is we're kind of talking about sort of, definitions and whatnot. What was the purpose and and the intent of residency? And I haven't studied these schools in any detail, to say the least, but I mean, I can't, there are a lot of things in psychology that I think you just do have to be physically present to do. And that doesn't mean that lots of things can't be done remotely. But not everything. I don't know. Just, I'm throwing out some thoughts.
In the interest of time, we are barking towards 7:30. There are two new items on the agenda that I would really like to get to. One being the survey, the other being the discussion about the jurisprudence, because we have punted on both of those in the last meeting. I would like to return to, because this is a really important point. This matter of residency is very important. And in my meeting with Dave, previous to this meeting, we meet to prep for this meeting, we had a discussion about this, and I knew this was going to come up and be an important point. I'd like to come back to this. I will say I've been quiet about during the discussion. My concern is in assessment, particularly in intelligence assessment. If I had one sort of yellow flag that I would raise, and I know that intelligence assessments are now moving towards being online. There are a number of those that are doing that. But if we're talking Wechsler series, or if we're talking Stanford Binet or Woodcock Johnson, that those are, the in-person things where you need to see, is this a 45-degree or is this a 90-degree? Those sorts of things, like that's hard if you're going to pan a camera over. I can't say exactly what it is, but if you're going to pan a camera over certain things, that's pretty hard to do in terms of supervision, or can be difficult to do over supervision and get it correct. That's the thing that I'm thinking about. But if anyone has any kind of last comments, and we will certainly return to this this is June, we'll return to it in our August meeting. I'll take any last comments or thoughts. I don't want to shut the show down with me being the last word necessarily.
I guess
I would, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark, go ahead.
You sure? Okay. I would hate to see the Wechsler scales or face-to-face testing with IQs all go to online. That would just be, to me, that would be a terrible injustice, and very bad for the client or patient, whatever you want to call them. So I hope that never happens. I mean, the Wechsler scales are among the best tests to give for intelligence overall, in my opinion. I mean, Stanford Binet as well. So that's the only comment I want to make is I just don't want to see it turn more and more to online. You know, the face-to-face, as I said earlier, is really the best way to go, in my opinion. That's all I have to say on that.
And I would agree. I think there's a great importance on the in-person things as well. I just think as a advisory board and as the BSRB as a governing board, we have to be careful not to pigeonhole training programs. Again, when I went to the DO program at KU, I was just blown away by their programs when you see these med students that are working on cadavers that aren't even present. It's all virtual reality. They're just swiping it the air, and I'm watching these students, or they have this glass table that looks like a TV, and they're doing operation procedures, and the professor's not even there. He's watching on his screen in a different place. And so I don't want us as a governing board, as an advisory board, to pigeonhole and slow down the progress of psychology either. But personally, I like face-to-face things a lot too. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know. Take it for what it's worth.
And who knows, there could be training apparati that I am unaware of when it comes to what it is that I just mentioned, and that could be doing the trick in terms of getting trainees up to speed and learning the things that they need to learn so that they can administer those tests in an efficient and proficient manner. So with that being said, I'll close the door on old business. I'll move us to new business. I mentioned 2 specific things that I would like to discuss, and well, really 3. Let's go in order A, B, and C, and we'll start with A under new business, with respect to the advisory committee membership.
And at our last meeting, we talked about that Rodney would be coming upon the end of his 4th term on the advisory committee, so he will need to come off the advisory committee after June. So this would have been his last meeting, and so that does open up a spot on the advisory committee for another individual. And I did send out messages to all psychologists to ask if they wanted to be considered, to submit a letter of interest and a resume or a CV, and we received responses back from 6 individuals, and those individuals' materials have been distributed to you. The plan is to go ahead and review that information and be ready to discuss a recommendation on a new member at the August advisory committee meeting. And to assist you with that, there is some language in the advisory committee policy that does talk about certain criteria to consider. So go ahead and review the materials they submitted, but also some things to factor in, think about, the different diversity factors that were included in the advisory committee policy, the geographic representation, including the different cities where people are working across the state, some of the different fields that people are working in, whether it's private practice or working in public or working for educational institutions. So just be thinking about some of those different factors and then be ready to talk about recommendations on a new member at the next meeting.
All right. Item B, and that's discussion on a possible survey for LPs.
Yes. So at the last meeting, we shared that we've been able to help the Social Work Advisory Committee put together some surveys every few years to collect information from their licensees in terms of issues, potentially in the area of supervision, information as far as telehealth, and that feedback has been very helpful. for the work of the advisory committee. And we've put together a couple of reports in recent years that are on the BSRB website concerning the findings from those surveys. At the last meeting, we talked about potential questions for a survey. And since that time, each of the other advisory committees is having a conversation similar to yours as far as whether they would like to have a survey issued to licensees to collect information. So I did include, I believe, a copy of the draft questions the professional counselors put together. So I thought that might be helpful to kind of see some of the areas that they were exploring. I also went ahead and just kind of put together just a short document. I'll share it here. It's something I was looking back through some of the social work items and some of the items professional counseling was looking at. And I thought I might review this with you to see what you thought about this as sort of a starting point to work from for questions concerning psychologists. I've got my screen shared here. We generally would do these types of surveys with some demographic questions, and we can definitely add to these or tweak them. But what we've asked in the past has been, what counties do you practice in? And part of that is it lets us know, do we have good representation around the state? Also, we have a number of out-of-state licensees in all the professions. And so when we see counties that are outside of Kansas, that lets us know we have representation in terms of our out-of-state licensees as well. We ask people, do you practice in a predominantly urban area, rural area, or frontier area? And then a good question, and also in terms of demographics, might be how many years have you practiced psychology? So that would let us know sort of individuals who are newer to the practice or individuals who have practiced for several years. And then in looking at some of the other surveys from social work and also professional counseling, I thought maybe some supervision questions might be helpful. For example, do you currently provide supervision to applicants in Kansas? And if so, have you experienced any issues providing supervision or seen any issues while providing supervision? That's something along those lines. And then if you do not provide supervision, could you explain why? One of the issues that we have run into for some of the other professions has been some concerns expressed to us about a lack of supervisors available for some of the other professions. And so if there are reasons that individuals are not providing supervision, but if there were supports maybe we could offer, that would be interesting. So I just thought that might be a question to consider. And then some other ones, I titled it under disciplinary issues, but the idea was maybe this would be an opportunity for us to collect information on ways in which we can work on protecting the public by collecting some of this information. So some of the draft questions I put down over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing psychology in Kansas, could you share information on any practice-related issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appeared to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? Over the past 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? And then do you have any comments or feedback you think would be helpful for members of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the BSRB to receive when evaluating possible changes to statutes and regulations for the psychology profession? So kind of a catch-all, but in case something was not asked about. But we do not have to use these questions. I just kind of looked at the other surveys and tried to look for things that might be applicable to your profession. And so as a starting thing to work from, I wanted to provide this to you and get your thoughts and see if you would like to adjust some of these questions or add some questions to this. Normally, we would have about 14 questions in a survey based on what we've done recently.
So psychologists have a little bit of a different supervisory structure than the counselors and social workers, in that we have a practicum structure and internship and then postdoc. And once you get your hours from postdoc, then you're done. But that does raise a question. Kansas still does have the postdoc requirement, right, folks?
Yes.
So a question could be, And Missouri did it. Does Kansas want to toss the postdoc? Missouri did it how long ago? It's been less than 10 years. I've been licensed 12, and it happened within my licensure time.
Might have been 18.
Yeah, it was. Yes, that sounds about right.
A lot of states have done several. I mean, there have been quite a few states that have done this. And they require that so they still have to have 1,800 additional hours besides the pre-doc internship. And they can make that up with their practicum and postdoc, or the all practicum if it covers the required number of hours.
Wait a second. So it can cover, I thought it was in Missouri that it can cover practicum plus internship. I thought it could be practicum plus internship, so it can add up to 1,800.
I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it's usually that. So they have to, like, we require 3,600 hours to get licensed. So we count just internship and postdoc, but other states allow the second 1,800. So to bring their total up, they can count all the practicum hours, but they still have to have a total of like 3,600 hours.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So long that they get it, I mean, they can get it pre-doc.
Yes.
That's potentially one question that could be asked of the members or the psychologists.
I think there's a way that you could like for me, especially, with the discussion about telehealth, in what counties do you practice? If your practice is primarily telehealth, you could serve a lot more counties than if your practice is traditional brick and mortar. So it could be, and I don't know how sophisticated you want this to be, like, in what counties do you practice? Do you use traditional like face-to-face or telehealth? And then it could be like branching logic. Do you use red cap?
Yeah, I'm curious, what about a question like this? Is the majority of your practice in person or telehealth?
Yeah.
Something like that?
I think I've got a clarifying question that maybe is worth including. When we're talking about practice, are you talking exclusively clinical? Because if we're looking at, or not exclusively clinical, I mean like therapeutic or assessments, as opposed to working at an educational institution or something along those lines.
Yep.
Because if we're trying to get after access to care or workforce size, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Even a question maybe of what percentage of your practice is patient facing or something along those lines.
Yeah, I had a similar thought of, I'd like to somehow tease out respondents who are strictly in academia versus strictly in clinical work, or a combo in some
Right.
fashion.
Perhaps administrative as well.
Yeah, I like that.
This is just an editing thing on 1B. Sorry.
Sorry, I was freezing up a little bit, but 1B.
You could say, is it in a predominantly urban, rural, or frontier area? And get rid of all the areas except for the last one. Do you see what I mean?
Sorry, say that again.
Instead of, is your practice in a predominantly urban area, rural area, or frontier area? It could be in a predominantly urban, comma, rural, comma, or frontier area. Well, no, not the first part. I meant just get rid of area.
Oh, I see.
Get rid of area, the second area, and leave the third area. There you go.
Okay.
You'd probably get some better information on C, if you had some sort of drop down choices, percentages, stuff
Yeah,
like that.
I agree.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, if we can do that, that is helpful. I'll try to look at some ranges there. Because then we can convert that into a nice pie chart versus
Yeah.
something else.
And I would say probably the same for D as well, if you can break that up.
Yeah.
For B, I might include the suburbs because some folks,
Oh, yeah.
a number of folks would say that they are in a more suburban area rather than urban area.
Could you maybe try and define it by population size?
Um,
I don't know what Manhattan, Kansas is. We've got 50,000 people. I don't know which one of those we are.
it's true. Yeah, maybe we can define.
Doug Wright could probably talk a long time about what is rural, because he gives a presentation to our interns every year on that.
I was thinking the same thing. I could divide it several ways, but
Yeah, we were
it's
talking
not
about
easy.
how to define frontier as well. So okay.
Yeah.
On 1D, maybe we can include psychological evaluations or psychological testing or something on number D. You've got, I know that's a big part of my practice.
I think it might be easier to just say direct client care, and that just encompasses therapies,
Yeah,
evals,
therapy
things
and
like that.
Sure.
evals.
Any other thoughts on the type of questions that would be helpful to collect information on?
I remember last time leaving off on, I didn't know if we would still want to include whether or not people would like to have a jurisprudence
Yes.
exam. That's, yeah.
Totally agree with that. That's a great question.
On the same lines, and also stealing off of the agenda, the question about AI. I don't, I mean, that's something that's it's going to become a topic that's going to have to be addressed in the coming future. And I don't know if that's even just a open-ended, what do you think question, or what are your concerns, or how to approach it. But I think that's something to bring up.
Second that one too.
Under supervision questions, do we want to have a question regarding face-to-face synchronous supervision?
I like the thought of that. Like what you're saying, Linda, like how are psychologists engaging in supervision with their supervisees?
Yeah. And, I don't know if we want this in here because we don't want it to get too long. Excuse me, but like questions about their opinion. In your opinion, how beneficial is the use of telehealth to your practice or your supervision activities?
Yeah, I like opinion questions because we have ours, but we're a very small group. So I think the more people we hear from, the better.
Yeah.
Another pulse check opinion question, kind of from the tabled topic earlier, would be thoughts about prescribing psychs and scripts.
Yep.
Where they, seems like that's kind of maybe stalled out field wide a little bit, but I also am not really tracking right now. So
I hope we'll get a chance to discuss that sometime. I know you said we will, regarding psychotropic medications, how important that can be.
I would love to have a discussion about that. I was just doing some reading about it, and to Matt's point, there does seem to be some stalling field wide. There are only, like you said, Mark, there are only six
states. Yeah, there are six
going
states. And again, I don't want to get off the subject here, but I could talk about this for a long time, whenever you want me to, because I can't prescribe medicine like in New Mexico. If I moved to New Mexico, for example, I'd be able to do that, but I'm not going to move to New Mexico. I'm going to stay right here in Kansas. But no, I think it's a very important area. And whenever you want me to discuss it, I'll be happy to, because I've been through all the training through the program, and including the supervision, having 100 people monitoring medications, the labs and all that stuff. You just tell me when you want me to discuss it. I'll be happy to.
No, absolutely. And, then there's the matter of training, and there aren't that many training programs.
That's right. Yep. You just tell me when, and I'll be happy to discuss what the training involves and the examinations you have to take, the national medical examination you have to take, supervision, etc.
Well,
so on the survey, under instead of demographic questions, could that be entitled practice questions? And then do we want a strict demographic question so we can get an indicator of the diversity of our psych practitioners in Kansas?
And this might, this would only tell us who responded to the survey, but we can include something in terms of our responses on the survey.
Yeah.
Agree with getting some demographics.
And that could then become number one, demographic questions, and then number two becomes practice questions.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So that's the first section of the, like it becomes number one, demographic questions, and then there's a series of questions about demographics and diversity. And then it becomes number two, practice questions. There you go. What do you guys think?
I like that.
Yeah, good idea.
Thanks. I could feel my little brain turning.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me play around with these items. I really appreciate all the feedback and the comments, and I will try to take this and put them into some regular questions, and then we can kind of continue to work on this in the next meeting if that sounds good to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll have us move on very quickly to one more new item, and that is, Dave, if you can give uh, a quick overview of what you have kind of thought about when it comes to a possible jurisprudence, and we can pick up the discussion in our next meeting.
Yes. So there are 7 professions we regulate, and over the past year, 6 months, I've talked to certain board members, and it's been a longer conversation too. Kansas does not currently require a jurisprudence examination for our professions, but there are a lot of states that do require a jurisprudence examination, and ultimately the mission of the board is to protect the public. And that is why we not only license and regulate the professions, we also investigate complaints against practitioners, and we have an interest in making sure that the licensees are aware of the requirements and the laws in Kansas. And so it really would benefit the public if practitioners understood their responsibilities and were, more aware of the different requirements and rules, which would hopefully lead to less complaints and less violations and less people being harmed. So the question really has kind of been how best to address this. And so I've worked with some board members. We've done some research of what other states do in terms of a jurisprudence examination. There are some states that require an examination, especially for people who are coming in from out of state. I've seen some different models that are used. Some states put this together themselves. They have a mandatory test that individuals have to take. You have to reach a certain pass point. Some states have outsourced this to different companies that essentially put together either a written test or an online module. And there is sometimes a cost that that company would receive for individuals. I've heard sometimes it's about $100, sometimes it's less. And so trying to work through these differences and trying to figure out the best approach, we decided to try to think a little bit outside the box and see if maybe this was an opportunity to do something to the benefit of licensees, and also avoid another requirement for licensure and another potential cost to licensees. So the proposal as an alternative to the traditional jurisprudence exam was to try to motivate behavior by using more of a carrot approach than a stick. And so instead of making it a requirement and having a traditional test, we were considering doing was proposing to the board basically a live webinar that we would offer quarterly for each of the professions, and we would put together jurisprudence type questions, and we would do it live, and we would work with the company that we could have people log into this portal, and they could essentially answer the questions as we go along. And essentially we would ask someone a question, let them enter their response, and we would do it with anybody who logged in could participate, and it would be free. And we would promote this, and then we would go through the jurisprudence type questions, and after people entered their responses, we would let them know what the correct response was. And so it'd be kind of a learning opportunity, and we would use it as a webinar. And at the end, we would give people a free hour of continuing education credit for having attended this. And our initial proposal would be that we could offer it for free. That individuals we would ask if they do it, if they could, and promote it, and hope the motivation of the free CE credit would be sufficient for individuals to go ahead and sign up and do it. And I would go ahead and take care of that in terms of the BSRB. We would just need some assistance putting together those questions. But I thought, maybe if we did it, and I don't mean to make light of this because it is a really important issue, but if we treated it more like something like almost like live trivia, where we made it sort of a fun opportunity for people to learn and be aware of these different requirements, but instead of making it a requirement where you have to take a test, pay a fee, instead we offered it and gave them the benefit of the CE credit. Perhaps this could be a nice service the BSRB could do for licensees, and we could still get the outcome that we would like. So just kind of wanted to run this by you. I've had a chance to talk to the other advisory committees about the same concept too, gotten a lot of positive feedback, but I think this is something that we could attempt to do. I'm not aware of any other states taking this approach, so it is somewhat, like I said, outside the box. But I think it could be a good way to motivate the right behavior, and also kind of a fun way to get participation, and also something the BSRB could do to give back to the profession and help the overall mission of the board. So wanted to get your comments and thoughts on that.
I think that's very behavior analytic of you, David. And I think I think it's a great idea. You know, I'd much rather make learning fun and increase engagement, because that's where we know learning happens. And I think the offer of a CE is definitely going to pique people's interest. So I think it's a great idea.
I second that 100%. I love your approach. Right with you.
Kudos for creativity, Dave.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good, and it'll hopefully keep people thinking about it throughout their career. Sometimes you take a test at the beginning, you cram for a test. Not that anybody on this call would ever do that. You cram for a test, and then the information's gone. But I like this being more of a continuing ed approach.
Yeah, we were kind of thinking, you know, if it all works according to how we would like to have it designed, we could even kind of establish a certain, you know, point where we would hope people that would score high enough on it. And then maybe we could even put something like that on the website, you know, to kind of highlight people who are doing extremely well on this, to kind of showcase them as well. And so.
Well, it sounds like there are a number of folks who like the idea, and we can report that back out to, would it be the full board, or how would we proceed?
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a consensus that there's positive feedback on this proposal, so we can just communicate that back at the next board meeting in July.
All right, well, one last thing. Rodney McNeil is not here this evening, but this would have been, or this is still his last meeting as a member of the advisory committee. And Dave, I'll have you say a few words.
Yes, so I know Rodney's not here, but hopefully he comes back, you know, to watch the video on YouTube. We've really enjoyed having him as a member of the advisory committee. He's been great in terms of the discussion. Really enjoyed working with him, and him volunteering all the time that he has put in over the last 8 years. So really appreciate his service to the BSRB and also the citizens of Kansas. So wanted to wish Rodney well and thank him for his service on the advisory committee.
And I would just second that. The last couple of years that I've been on, he's always contributed wonderfully to this committee, and I appreciate everything that he has done over the last 8 years for the profession and for the state of Kansas. So wherever you are, Rodney, thank you very much for all that you've done for the profession and for the citizens of Kansas. So.
And on behalf of the advisory committee, we will send a certificate to him with his time that he's served on the advisory committee as a token of our appreciation. So that'll be coming to him in the mail.
With that being said, we are just a little after 8. I will take a motion to adjourn.
I approve of adjourning.
Mark, do I have a second?
Second.
Well, I don't think that we need a formal vote for that. Our next meeting is August
13th.
13th. That Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. You all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, and try and stay cool. You all take care.
Thank you.
You too. Enjoyed it.